We are coming down to it. 3 women left. Fantasy suites around the corner. Which woman does Peter want to marry? Which woman does he just want to sleep with? I'll give you a hint. It's this one. Now, this preview is not your normal one. Usually previews blast us in quick succession with different shots and sound bites that could be from all over the season and not just the next episode. This preview is based much more on a storyline, Madison and fantasy suites. And this looks to be the center point for the remainder of the show, at least until Barbara says this.
Don't let her go. Don't let her go.
So let's take a look at this preview and see what we can sleuth out for the final 3 Fantasy Suite week and speculate just what this ending has in store for us. Now, if you have outright spoilers, please don't post them in the comment section below. Sleuthing is always welcome, and as per usual, I'll be posting a link to the full preview in the description, so if you'd like to watch that beforehand, you can find it right there. Alright, let's take a look.
I haven't seen Madison like this before.
She's unwinding. She gave him the ultimatum.
We left last week's episode on Madison pulling Peter aside after the final 4 rose ceremony to tell him something. Now it appears that Madison lays an ultimatum on Peter. So first, what could this ultimatum be? The idea that immediately comes to mind is something like this. If you sleep with any of the other women, I'm gone. If you don't, I'll marry you or be open to that. The ultimatum could be many things, but if we're going to follow along with what the preview wants us to think in this moment, that an ultimatum occurs at the final 4 rose ceremony starting off next episode, it would have to do with fantasy suites ahead. But don't be so sure this ultimatum happens at the start of the next episode. It very well might, but I'd say it's just as likely to happen later on, maybe before the final 3 rose ceremony, or during Madison's fantasy suite. Say Madison learns that Peter slept with one or both of Hannah Ann and Victoria, and then lays an ultimatum on him. And what Madison says to Peter at the start of the next episode here, where she's pulling Peter aside, could be 1, she's relaying the info that she's saving herself for marriage, and possibly also 2, she's in love with him. But with how Victoria already seems to know that Madison is a virgin based off of this shot,
She has waited this long to tell him she's a virgin.
it would make sense that Madison tells Peter he's a virgin in front of the other women. That way, Victoria can add it to her burn book later. Regardless, it all is likely going to revolve around Madison saving herself, her faith, and being comfortable with Peter spending the night with other women.
Putting him in that position is so unfair. Are you kidding me?
And of course, Victoria will be piling on. And really, it's no shade here when I say that, because oftentimes when we have drama or negativity around us, and then someone else suddenly has new drama, people often pile onto that person to deflect. Like a defense mechanism. Oh yeah, a woman came up to Peter and told him I'm a homewrecker, but hey, look over there, an ultimatum? I would never do that. Are you kidding me? That's so unfair to Peter. Disgusting. It might not even be a conscious decision to do so, but especially considering these women could be thinking 1, Madison might be a frontrunner at this point, and 2, we're so close to the end, any excuse for someone else to go over them is one to emphasize.
This week is Fantasy Suite Week. I am in love with 3 women right now.
Alright, pause here. First off, we have a helicopter ride, and we've moved on to another tropical destination. Now, this is not my sleuthing, but commenters on past preview breakdowns and in our Discord server have mentioned that in this shot here, the mystery ending where Chris Harrison has some surprise news for Peter, it looks a lot like Australia, specifically with this rock formation and the general outback appearance. But wherever we end up, we're likely going to be settling in there for the rest of the season. For example, once Hannah Brown's season settled into Greece for Fantasy Suite Week, they stayed in that general area until the final rose ceremony. On top of that, Australia fits with the very diverse environment we see. Here, tropical, there, desert. This shot of Victoria, we've seen before, and we used it to determine she was likely going to make it one more episode and to Fantasy Suites. Be glad to see it now once more, as it means we can rule out the shot being from a Final 2 scenario. Well, not entirely, but almost assuredly it's from the day portion of Victoria's Fantasy Suite date.
And I have no idea how I'm going to do this.
Alright, pause. Here's another shot we've seen before and used to determine that Hannah Ann was going to make it past the final 6 and the final 4. With the rest of the season most likely occurring in one general location, we've entered a part of the show where pretty much any footage left could be from, well, any point. For example, we've seen this shot of Hannah Ann tearing up, still a shot we haven't seen yet on the show. But could it be from a final 3 rose ceremony, a final rose ceremony, a fantasy suite date? You could argue any of it.
All 3 of us will be like living together.
Awkward. So awkward.
Now this is different. If you're new to the franchise, once hometowns hit, the remaining contestants are separated and only see each other at the rose ceremonies. This time, however, the women will be living together during Fantasy Suite Week. This has to be for one obvious reason. The producers saw that Madison was saving herself for marriage. Now she has to watch the other women come back the morning after from their fantasy suite dates. And of course, drama will ensue.
It is kind of a black and white situation. These are the expectations I have for myself. These are the expectations that I have for our relationship.
Madison laying out her expectations. Here she's talking to Hannah Ann about it. With all the women living together, it explains how Victoria and Hannah Ann know so many details of the ultimatum, and Madison saving herself for marriage.
I wouldn't be able to move forward if you have slept with the other women.
And there it is. We've heard Madison talk about this before. Now, this might be the ultimatum, but I'm also wondering if it's not. Like, if this is simply Madison laying out her expectations for the relationship, like she mentioned in the previous shot where she was talking with Hannah Ann. What if the ultimatum comes after this, when she finds out Peter has been intimate with one or both of the other women? We've also seen this moment in a previous preview as well. Remember this?
I don't want this just to feel like it's all about sex, but I have been intimate.
Which also means Madison won't be the first fantasy suite date of the week. We've also seen this shot of Madison walking away. Now, immediately after viewing the rose ceremony from last Monday, I saw this dress and went, whoa, that looks like the same sparkly dress Madison wears when walking away upset. There was even some debate about it during my live stream. But after a quick review of the footage, we can see that the backs are different. Madison is actually wearing the dress here during the night portion of her fantasy suite date. And with this, we can really start to puzzle together what goes on next week. 1. Madison tells Peter she's saving herself for marriage. He needs to know before fantasy suites because obviously sex will be an important part of the discussion as it always is that week. She could also tell him she's falling in love with him here to balance the news with something exciting. 2. The producers start cackling wildly as they come up with the idea to have the women still living together during Fantasy Suite Week. They then start planning the order of the Fantasy Suite dates, which takes all of 5 seconds. Madison goes last. 3. The first 2 Fantasy Suite dates happen. If I had to guess, I'd say Hannah Ann, then Victoria, so as to place the date that likely will have the most sexual tension right before Madison's Fantasy Suite. Peter then sleeps with one or both of them. Based off of what he said in the past preview, it's at least one. I'd wager my tinfoil hat that either way, it happens with Victoria. It's the easiest explanation as to why Peter's been okay with all the crazy drama that's happened every single time the two of them have been together. At least from what they've shown us on TV. 4. Madison then stews over her feelings about the Fantasy Suite dates as she watches the women come back from their dates the morning after. 5. On her Fantasy Suite date, Madison tells Peter she's going to have a hard time moving forward if he slept with the other women, especially as she stewed over everything watching the other two come back. 6. Peter says he doesn't want this to be all about sex, but he has been intimate with one or both of the other women. 7. Madison runs off. As we mentioned before, same dress here as during the Fantasy Suite dinner. So her reaction here is from what Peter says on their date, as opposed to at a future rose ceremony. Now, the last question becomes, will Madison stay, or will she leave the show? We've got one more shot to look at here, with Madison in the same dress and Peter comforting her. So we can see that Madison is at least willing to hug it out at some point, and she won't be pulling a don't touch me, stay away from me kind of moment. But if you remember during Colton season when Cassie left, there was still a lot of hugging and kissing before she eventually said goodbye. Now, I still believe that Madison is involved in the ending of this season and is the person Mrs. Weber is talking about when she says bring her home. So, here are 2 scenarios. 1, Madison leaves, it comes down to Hannah Ann and Victoria, but Madison comes back. Now, Peter is messed up about his decision, saying, I don't need this right now. Or, more likely in my opinion, 2, Madison stays. She accepts the rose despite everything that goes down. And here is ultimately where an ultimatum could possibly come in if it's going to happen at the end of their fantasy suite date. Like, I will accept a rose if you promise to do this. Or I will stay in the competition if you eliminate Victoria, or if you eliminate this person or that person. But eventually, as we move into the finale, Madison realizes that she can't move past what happened and decides she can't accept a proposal. She leaves before the final rose ceremony where Peter was going to pick her. Barbara says bring her home, and Peter chases after her. So, let's talk elimination. Obviously, with what I just mentioned, I think Madison will get a rose and ultimately accept it, leaving Hannah Ann and Victoria as possible eliminations. At this point in the endgame, there's no solid proof from the previews that gives an outright clear indication of one over the other. My reasoning, however, is this. After Madison's date, Peter won't want to rock the boat anymore, especially if Madison is staying. The safest bet for a drama-free final two would be to give the other rose to Hannah Ann and not put Madison and Victoria in the same room together, because apparently that's what they're doing now. Plus, it feels like a lot of what Peter's feeling right now for Victoria is emphasized by physical chemistry more so than emotional, and that feeling might get purged with a fantasy suite date. Or maybe I'm just being hopeful here. After the display at Hometowns, should Peter have kept what appears to be an emotionally unhealthy relationship around? No. Did he? Yes. So there's also a reason to think, well, what's going to stop him from keeping her around again? And to that I say, good point. So that's it for this preview breakdown for Week 9 Fantasy Suite Week. Hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you did. Next week, 3 become 2, and we get to watch the Fantasy Suite drama unfold. So until then, Bachelor Fantake, out.
Putting him in that position is so unfair. Are you kidding me?